Hi, my name's Phil. I like to come out politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss how water companies are now being investigated over some suspicious figures with regards to the new infrastructure that we desperately need. If the accusations are true, then water companies may have been engaging in a very VIP lane style level of excessive spending, shall we say, in what would look like a desperate bid to keep ripping customers off. But first, for daily news and commentary, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So after, 3.5 decades of water privatisation, we have been left with none of the modernised infrastructure we were promised, leading to lots of water being lost in leaks and increasingly polluted waterways as it becomes cheaper to just dump sewage and pay the fines than treat it. This has now changed. Legislation has already been passed to tackle some of this neglect and, quite frankly, abuse, with a review underway, which I think is reporting this summer, looking at ways of making the water industry fit for the future. One of the ideas being looked at would be to remove profit from the sector entirely. And as I go through in this video, we've got a new big reason why this is very, very urgent. Anyway, in the meantime, the law now requires water companies to produce plans to tackle leaks and pollution, personal criminal liabilities for executives if they don't comply. The punishments can include imprisonment if they deliberately attempt to conceal what they're up to, environmental damage and so on, from the public, as has been allowed to happen, quite frankly, ever since Liz Truss. Remember her? Before she was wrecking the economy, she ran the Environment Department about 10 years ago when she started this process of saying to water companies, you're not supposed to dump, but I'll tell you what, if you remove all your monitoring stations, we won't really moan about it. But as well as forcing water companies to do their jobs properly at last, we are also going to be getting that long-promised modernisation. Just for context, there has only been one new reservoir built since privatisation, about 35 years ago, and that was commissioned before privatisation. So no new reservoirs have been built by a private water company in England, ever. Now we're getting 9 new ones. Of course, this needs money, and so water bills have had to go up. But because the public are understandably cheesed off at having to pay even higher bills to rogue water companies, the Labour's Environment Secretary, Steve Reed, ring-fenced the money. So water bills have gone up to pay for the infrastructure we now need, but the government have set rules that the money cannot be used for dividends or bonuses. It gets spent on the infrastructure. Any money left over is to be returned to customers, which all sounds grand, and I wish the government would do better at communicating that to people. However, there are accusations now that the water companies are still sort of straining at their new leash. A report suggests that some experts have looked at the sums of money that water companies are assigning to different projects, like new sewage works. They've compared them to similar works in other countries, and they're going, hang on a minute, it looks a bit expensive. The suggestion is that it's not corruption in the literal sense. The suggestion is that because water companies are effectively not spending their own money here, like the money is coming from customers and they're not allowed to dip into it for profit. So if they manage to deliver the project under budget, they don't get to take the extra money as profit, right? So they're not focusing on value for money. A group called Windrush Against Sewage Pollution noted one example of an upgrade costing £435 million. But they say, well, hang on a minute, when it was first proposed, it was going to be £40 million. Now, we have had some high inflation in the past few years, right, of course. But it still sounds a hell of an increase, doesn't it? It's like 11 times as much. Especially when they discovered that a new sewage works in Denmark cost the equivalent of £29 million. Now, they did note that the cost of living in Denmark is higher than in the UK. So actually, projects should cost more there. I will say, has to be said, that the one in Denmark is smaller in scale. The Danish one serves 100,000 people. The Oxford proposal would need to manage 250,000. And it's probably fair to say that the cost may not scale up in proportion to the number of people it will serve. Like, sometimes you may think a higher capacity, economies of scale, Phil, it should actually be cheaper. So, well, it could be more complex. Serving more people might need more complex works or a more complex construction. But the cost should probably not be 15 times as much for 2.5 times the capacity. If you're going to say that 2.5 times the capacity results in 6 times the cost per capita served, you should probably be building 2 smaller sewage works. They also cited a case of a new sewage works in America costing, they say they cost an average of £248 million and service 1 million people. So Oxford is paying nearly twice as much money for a quarter of the capacity you'd get in America for the same. Now, yes, there will be differences. It might cost more to manage the building needed in Oxford than in some other parts of America or Denmark. There may be some extra cost due to the high demand and lower supply within the construction industry right now, because the government are putting all sorts of demands on new construction. But the accusation is that the sums of money being allocated are so far beyond what it costs in other advanced economies that it's incredibly suspicious. And it's not just Oxford. There are other examples of similar, like, hundreds of millions of pounds being allocated to new sewage works for other projects around England as well. So OfWat, the regulator, are now investigating to make sure value for money is being delivered. Just to be clear, the accusation here is not one of outright corruption. It's not that the water companies are attempting some fiddle to cream off money for themselves. There is no way of doing that without a very illegal quid pro quo deal with the construction companies. That would land you in prison if that was discovered. The accusation is just that the water companies just don't care about value for money. Because from their point of view, the government have told them to modernise infrastructure to reduce water leaks, something that was promised 35 years ago, and of course to avoid dumping raw sewage where it's not absolutely necessary. The money needed has been added to water bills, but the water companies aren't allowed to dip into it. So there's one incentive for them to get value for money, and that is wanting the best for their customers. And if these accusations are proven to any degree at all, that water companies have just thrown tenders out, not haggled for the best prices. Oh, we want a new sewage works. Can you build it? Great. What do you want? £500,000? No problem. Or £500 million rather, no problem. So if that's what's been going on, it just shows you how little regard they have for their customers. If the government and OfWat are going to have to keep leaning on them like this to get them to do even simple things right, it should expose just how little regard a privatised public service has for the public, especially one which exists as a monopoly. Because you can't choose your water company. Even at this point, the government have passed laws forcing them to monitor outflows, have an action plan to reduce leaks and pollution. They're forcing them to upgrade infrastructure, even when they're being made to do their jobs properly. Out of either apathy or spite, they are potentially still trying to rip the public off, even when they gain nothing from it themselves. And I do hope that when the review concludes, that the chief recommendation is, do you know what? We need to remove profit from the system. Whether that is through nationalisation or just making all water companies non-profit, like Welsh Water, for example, that seems to work. Just create an industry where executives are motivated to deliver the service, not dividends for people in Dubai who don't give a crap about the service. Profit is a very poor motivator for the public interest at the best of times. But there is zero competition within the water industry because it's impossible to choose a different provider. It's a monopoly. The Tory arguments about competition in the market are impossible to apply, even hypothetically. I mean, we know they haven't worked even when there is technically some competition for public services. The competition in the market only works for something people don't really need. When they need it, it doesn't work so well. But in this particular case, not even hypothetically, it is a monopoly. You cannot generate competition in a monopoly by definition. And if the water companies are found to have not ensured value for money with these projects, then the idea that private companies would just, out of the goodness of their hearts, have the best interests of customers, that's also blown out the water. But I'd also say this, if it does turn out that construction in the UK really does cost a lot more than in other advanced economies like America or Denmark, we need to take a serious look at why that is as well. We've already fallen behind in national infrastructure thanks to the Tories building, actually nothing in 14 years. They cancelled projects, didn't actually build anything. We'll never catch up if building anything at all costs like 6 times as much as it does in other countries. But I do find it very difficult to believe it really does cost that much more here. I can believe it costs more. Brexit has harmed our supply chains of both workers and materials. We've got an increased demand for construction because Labour have gone, look, nothing's been built for 14 years. We need to get building now. Sure. But, so we remember, it's not just waterworks we needed. We need new energy projects. We need new housing projects, schools, hospitals, like the whole works. But these figures still seem excessive. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.